Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. One day after calling MAGA Republicans a threat to the country, President Biden today says something different about Trump supporters. NTD's Iris Tao has more on the fallout from his primetime speech.
Asked if he considers all Trump supporters a threat to the nation, President Biden said this on Friday.
I don't consider any Trump supporter to be a threat to the country. I do think anyone who calls for the use of violence, refuses to acknowledge when an election has been won, that is a threat to democracy.
That comes less than a day after Biden attacked what he calls MAGA Republicans in a primetime speech on Thursday.
The Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
Those remarks getting polarized reactions. While Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls it an inspiring speech that makes clear our democracy is on the line, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says
the first lines out of his mouth should be to apologize for slandering tens of millions of Americans as fascists.
Others criticize Biden for placing Marines behind him.
If you don't want the so-called MAGA Republicans or any Republicans to be politicizing the military, then you shouldn't do it yourself.
The White House, however, said Friday that having Marines during the speech
was intended to demonstrate the deep and abiding respect the president has for these service members.
And Biden's Thursday speech will be followed by a Saturday rally in the same state by the MAGA Republican at the center of his speech, former President Donald Trump. Trump is rallying there with gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano and Senate candidate Mehmet Oz, or what's dubbed the entire Pennsylvania Trump ticket. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
The president gave a speech last night at a time when the country is as divided as ever. To assess the speech, we're happy to have Texas Congressman Louie Gohmert. Congressman Louie Gohmert, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Congressman, President Biden's speech last night, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about the presence of the military behind the president with this rather ominous backdrop. They say optics are everything. How did it come across to you?
Well, it was a backdrop that any leader would be proud of if that leader were of the former Soviet Union. You had the red backdrop. It looked wonderful, like the Kremlin stars, the red stars. And it looked like something any Soviet leader would have been proud to display and have as part of their history. But as a historian, somebody who's never quit studying history since I majored in it in college, to me, it's frightening for what the voting is. It's the kind of thing, and I know we hate inappropriate comparisons to Hitler, but for those who know history, they know he was demagoguing his opponents. He was setting them up to get criticism. And then, as historically people give credit to Hitler for setting the Reichstag building on fire, he had been condemning his opponents, and so then it was easy to blame them for setting that fire, which allowed him to accumulate power and go after his enemies and shut them down. So we cannot allow them, no matter what Biden does, what he says, what the DOJ says, no matter how Gestapo-esque their tactics become, we can't let them provoke us into any violence, no matter what. We cannot do that.
It's an excellent point, Congressman. Nobody ever wants to see any violence under any circumstances. Right. Do you think this speech will ultimately help or hurt the Democrats in the upcoming elections?
Well, I don't think it was to help or hurt them other than to set up conservatives so that they can be the scapegoat for anything that happens. And by the way, Steve, if I could refer back to the raid on Mar-a-Lago, people, the DOJ is saying, oh, he was trying to take documents he had no right to. Well, this is the first time I'm aware of in history where the intel community and the DOJ did not recognize the president's declassification of documents. And I would submit that he was not trying to hide documents by taking them and having them at Mar-a-Lago. He knows if there's anything that was against Trump, even in the least bit, it already got leaked. There were people in the National Security Council, over 400 members, so many of them hated Trump. They already leaked it if it was the least bit condemning or would help make controversy out of Trump. Those are already out there. The things that he wanted to preserve were the things that would just show exactly what happened in those times that Trump was being accused of impropriety. He saw a need to preserve documents that would show his innocence of things he was charged with. So I think those documents were in much safer hands with Trump than they are in DOJ or Intel hands, or even now that we know even people at the National Archives will lie to try to set up Trump.
Congressman, if I could ask you a technical question. Along with studying history in college, you also went on to study law. Before coming to Congress, you were a judge. The special master request in the Trump raid, the judges delayed that decision. How should this be perceived? Is this a normal flow of events?
Well, it's not unusual to have decisions delayed by courts. But what was unusual was to have the FBI grab this material, a lot of which was privileged, and they knew there was privileged material there. And they knew the outcome of the appeals in the William Jefferson case. Obviously, William Jefferson was guilty. There was plenty of evidence from which to convict him. But Mueller, as FBI director, conducted a raid on his congressional office and seized all kinds of stuff. And they said, and we've set up a Chinese firewall. We're going to have members of the Justice Department go through those documents, and anything that's privileged, we'll have them set it aside, and then the prosecutors won't see that. And the appellate court said, no, you can't do that. You can't have that firewall within your own set of prosecutors. So they knew what they were doing was wrong. That, of course, was legislative versus executive. But in this case, you have attorney-client privileged documents, and they didn't care. And they knew they'd better get through them before the court had a chance to rule, so they could see everything that were in those sets of documents. So that's not unusual that a court would delay. It was unusual that the FBI could work so quickly to get through the documents so they could see all the privileged material that they wanted to.
Congressman Louie Gohmert, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Steve. Thank you.
Employers haven't been as enthusiastic about hiring people over the past few weeks, but the need for more workers is still rising slightly. According to the latest government report, the U.S. added 315,000 jobs in August.
America workers are back to work, earning more, manufacturing more, building an economy from the bottom up and the middle out.
The number of new jobs in August is higher than what many economists had expected, but it's still noticeably lower than the 526,000 positions in July. Last month's job report will be among the main factors the Federal Reserve will discuss. The agency will then determine how much to raise interest rates as a way to curb inflation. Earlier this week, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reported there were nearly 2 jobs available per every person looking for work. Today, the Justice Department released a detailed list of what it took from former President Trump's home during the Mar-a-Lago raid. It included over 11,000 documents and photographs without classified markings. The list included over 100 classified documents and an executive grant of clemency to Roger Stone. There were also newspapers, clothing, empty folders marked classified, military documents, and books. A Trump spokesperson says that the list shows that the raid was not a confined search, but instead a smash and grab. Florida federal judge Eileen Cannon ordered the release of the list. She's also deciding whether or not to appoint a special master to check for documents protected by attorney-client privilege or executive privilege. Doug Mastriano, Republican candidate for Pennsylvania governor, filed a lawsuit against the January 6th committee Thursday. He's seeking to block the panel from compelling him to sit for a deposition. Mastriano, endorsed by Trump, attended the January 6th rally in 2021. He never entered the Capitol building and has not been charged with anything. His lawsuit argues that the January 6th committee does not have the authority to compel depositions. The filing says the committee lacks a ranking minority member chosen by Republicans. Upon the committee's formation, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's nominations. Instead, she chose 2 Republicans to sit on the committee. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.